Donald Trump has been indicted in New York over a hush money payment involving adult film star Stormy Daniels during the 2016 presidential election. Thursday's indictment makes him the first current or ex-president to be charged with a crime. Russia is reportedly looking to offer North Korea food in exchange for weapons. The U.S. says the arms deal would violate UN Security Council resolutions. World EXPO officials will arrive in South Korea next week to inspect the city of Busan as a possible venue for the 2030 hosting job. To show Korea's confidence and dedication to the global event, an exhibition is taking place in Central Seoul. Our top story this morning, former U.S. President Donald Trump has been indicted over an alleged hush money payment. A grand jury in New York voted to indict him after investigating a $130,000 payout during the 2016 election to adult film actress Stormy Daniels to keep her silent over an alleged affair. This makes Trump the first U.S. president serving or former to face criminal charges. In a statement, Trump lashed out at Democrats and President Joe Biden, calling the result political persecution and election interference at the highest level in history, with Trump seeking a return to office in 2024. The indictment comes as Trump is currently the clear frontrunner among all Republican presidential candidates. It also comes as Trump is being investigated in several other cases, including his role in the U.S. Capitol riot in 2021, his efforts to overturn the election outcome in Georgia during the 2020 election, and his handling of classified documents after leaving office. As Russia appears to be running low on ammunition for the war in Ukraine, U.S. has said Russia will likely send a delegation to North Korea and that it seeks to offer food to Pyongyang in exchange for weapons. Our Peunji has more.
The White House has revealed that Russia is seeking to acquire more munitions from North Korea to bolster its war against Ukraine. In a press briefing on Thursday U.S. local time, the National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby said Vladimir Putin would likely send food to the regime in exchange for munitions. Noting that they have new information that Russia is actively seeking to acquire additional munitions from North Korea, he said Moscow is also seeking to send a delegation to Pyongyang. He added that any arms deal between North Korea and Russia would violate a series of UN Security Council resolutions. On North Korea's recent statements that they will not provide or sell arms to Russia, Kirby said the U.S. is continuing to monitor the situation closely. His comments came soon after the U.S. on Thursday imposed sanctions on a Slovakian man for trying to arrange the sale of more than 24 types of North Korean weapons and munitions to Russia. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has said schemes like this show that Vladimir Putin is now turning to suppliers like North Korea and Iran as a last resort. In December, Washington had previously accused Pyongyang of providing weapons to the Wagner Group, a pro-Russian mercenary outfit. Pyongyang denied the claims. Peunji, Arirang News.
Russian authorities have arrested an American reporter for the Wall Street Journal, accusing him of spying. The White House slammed Moscow for the move, calling the targeting of American citizens by the Russian government unacceptable. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
In a move that will certainly further deteriorate relations between the United States and Russia, Russian authorities on Thursday announced that it had detained Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich. Russia's main security service, the FSB, said that the American journalist, who had been based in Moscow, has been trying to obtain state secrets. A Russian district court in Moscow said that he would be detained until May 29th. The arrest of Gershkovich marks the first time an American journalist has been detained by Russia over allegations of spying since the Cold War. However, the arrest also comes a week after U.S. authorities arrested a Russian national in the United States for allegedly spying. Despite speculation, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov did not say if Gershkovich's arrest was a retaliatory measure. In response to the arrest, the White House slammed Moscow, calling it unacceptable.
The State Department has also been in touch with the Wall Street Journal and his family on this matter. This espionage charges are ridiculous. The targeting of American citizens by Russian government is unacceptable. We condemn the detention of Mr. Gershkovich in the strongest terms. We also condemn the Russian government's continued targeting and repression of journalists.
The White House spokesperson also warned Americans against traveling to Russia, while also calling on any U.S. citizens living or currently visiting Russia to leave immediately. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The U.S. Department of Defense on Thursday reaffirmed its firm stance on the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. That's according to Pentagon spokesperson Pat Ryder, who was asked whether the U.S. plans to deploy nuclear weapons in South Korea. Without directly answering the question, Ryder said the Pentagon will closely consult with Congress on the matter and will continue discussions with South Korea on extended deterrence. When asked whether the U.S. plans to deploy additional THAAD systems in South Korea, Ryder said there is nothing to announce on that matter. U.S. President Joe Biden has called for stricter banking regulations following the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. According to the White House on Thursday, Biden proposed a set of reforms aimed at reinstating safeguards for banks with assets between $100 billion and $250 billion and bolstering supervision of financial institutions. Among the proposed reforms include raising liquidity requirements and increasing stress tests for mid-sized banks. These are largely seen as a move to bring back regulations that have been scrapped under the previous Trump administration. And with Republicans in control of the House and seen as more skeptical of regulations, the White House added the reforms will be carried out under existing law. The 2023 South Korean baseball season kicks off tomorrow, April 1st. 10 clubs in the Korea Baseball Organization will begin the new season and the battle to claim the Korean Series title. For more, we're joined by Mr. Yoo Ji-ho, a sports writer from Seoul-based Yonhap News Agency. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Good morning. The KBO is back in full swing this year. What makes this year's edition different or stand out from the pre-pandemic era? I mean, in terms of scale and the number of fans expected at the stadium. I asked this question because some fans are reportedly quite disappointed by the poor quality shown by the Korean teams, including the ones at the World Baseball Classic.
Right, just touching upon some of the changes. I think this is the first 100% normal season since 2019. The fans were back in full capacity last year, but at the time we still had the indoor mask mandate, and that has since been lifted. So that means the one dome stadium in this league, the Kochuk Sky Dome in Seoul, the fans going to games in that stadium would no longer be required to wear a mask. So you're going to see fans in full capacity for second straight year and then no mask mandate, either indoors or outdoor stadiums. So that's, I guess, one notable change. Now, you mentioned the WBC and how the national team's performance might have been a letdown for baseball fans in this country. But some of the attendance numbers in the preseason games right after the tournament were actually very encouraging. I think some of the numbers caught even clubs in the league office by a little bit of a surprise. So I don't think there's as much concern in terms of attendance figures earlier in the season as there might have been. So I think that there's some good signs that the fans are still going to show up in big numbers. The opening day is a big deal. All 10 teams in action, 2 p.m. Afternoon start on the weekend. There's a lot of excitement in many different fan bases going into this season.
That's a relief. Now, what are some of the major highlights to look out for the season in the KBO? Now, SSG Landers will try to become the first team to successfully defend a title in 7 years. And we also see some interesting managerial duels this season, right?
Right. Landers had a historic season in 2022. They spent the entire season in first place and then went on to win the Korean Series. they will try to become the first team to win back-to-back titles since the Busan Bears back in 2015 and 2016. It's going to be an uphill battle for sure. There's a lot of parity in this league right now. Maybe not a lot of weak links compared to in the years past. So the Landers have the work cut off for them to win their second straight title. Now with the managers, we've got a new manager with the Busan Bears, Lee Seung-yup, one of the biggest legends in KBO history, making his managerial debut. And one of his closest friends in baseball, Park Jin-man, his former teammate with the Samsung Lions, will be managing Samsung Lions on a full-time basis after spending second half of last year on an interim basis. So the friends, they're going to put their friendship aside for a bit, try to take their team back to the playoffs after missing out last year. So that's one managerial matchup that's going to be really interesting to watch. And also the two foreign managers in this league, Carlos Rivera for the Hanwha Eagles, Larry Sun for the Lotte Giants, two very downtrodden clubs last season, both entering the final years of their contract. So they've got to prove themselves, or their job security might be in danger.
Yeah, competition over friendship for now. And before we let you go, Jiho, this is a relatively small league compared to Major League Baseball. Now, teams here play each other 16 times per season, and familiarity with breed contempt over the course of a season. Now, what are some key rivalries to watch out for this year?
Right. I touched upon the Bears and the Lions with the managers, but also the Busan Bears have the natural rivalry with the fellow Seoul club LG Twins. The Twins, I think a lot of people are picking them to probably win the championship this year. The Bears, maybe not so much, but they're going to be going out there with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. So the Twins-Bears rivalry, I think the Bears have had an upper hand in recent years, but I think the Twins are going to try to turn the tables maybe this year.
All right, Jiho, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.
There are now only a few days until the organizer of the World EXPO visits South Korea for an on-site inspection. The city of Busan is looking to host the 2030 World EXPO. With the country busy with last-minute preparations, a large-scale exhibition kicked off in capital Seoul yesterday. Our culture correspondent Song Yu-jin takes us there.
Blue roses, the symbol of hope and aspiration, light up Gwanghwamun Square in central Seoul. They're hoping that Busan, South Korea's second-largest city, becomes the venue for the 2030 World Expo, one of the three major international events along with the Olympics and the World Cup. In light of this, Gwanghwamun Square has gone through a complete makeover.
As the Bureau International d'Exposition, the organizer of the Expo, is visiting South Korea for a project examination, we planned this event to show people both at home and abroad Korea's dedication to the 2030 World Expo.
Here, you can take a look at the past and future of the World Expo. Yukjo-madang, the start of the square, tells the Expo's more than century-long history. Groundbreaking inventions like the telephone and the airplane were all introduced for the first time at past editions of the Expo. Next up, the three themes of the 2030 Busan World Expo. First, technology for humanity, like Korean motor giant Kia's new electric model, the EV9, is being showcased. Second, sustainable living with nature. You can enjoy some of SK Innovation's efforts to go green, like its fast-charging EV batteries. And a booth set up by Busan City where people can generate renewable energy by riding this bike inside. Finally, a platform for caring and sharing. Characters representing Lotte Group, Pelligom, Rotti, and Rori were there to greet visitors. There's also a wish tree filled with messages in support of Busan winning the bid. The 5-day exhibition gives some indication of Korea's ability to host the 2030 World Expo.
We were surprised because the place was packed with so many people. Just looking at this big crowd makes me confident that the 2030 World Expo is Busan's.
I'm very proud to be here seeing all these brands, and all these events are very exciting, all the photo booths, all the gifts that you're getting, and I hope Busan becomes the place for the Expo.
Now, hopes are high, and the excitement towards Busan's bid to host the 2030 World Expo is stronger than ever. Starting from here at Gwanghwamun Square, South Korea is showing that it's ready for the BIE's upcoming on-site inspection. 송유진, Arirang News.
South Korea's investments into Malaysia dates back to the 1980s. Based on their long, reliable trade partnership, the two countries now seek to take more dynamic steps in economic cooperation. Our economic correspondent Lee Dae-hyun met with the Malaysian Trade Minister for details.
When many countries look to the West for their development, there is a country that turned towards the East. It's Malaysia, South Korea's third-largest ASEAN trade partner. This year marks the 40th anniversary of Malaysia's Look East policy, a strategy to seek cooperation with East Asian countries for international benchmarking.
Investments from Korea itself into Malaysia since 1983 is close to $10 billion US dollars. It's grown a lot and it's growing fast. It's important. We have been working together when it comes to investment and trade, especially in the area of E&E, electrical and engineering, semiconductor, and also petrochemicals.
The two countries are now discussing ways to expand economic cooperation in a variety of sectors, including the digital economy, climate change, and green energy.
Well, one area of cooperation, in fact, I was with my counterpart, the Korean Trade Minister, is to ensure that we have restart our discussion on bilateral FTA, right? We also talk about opportunities to have more cooperation on the digital side together with on sustainability. So some of the collaboration includes sharing of knowledge between our academics, between the academia.
With countries around the world facing a global supply chain crisis, the minister says Malaysia is looking to work with Korea by rerouting the supply chain, or what he called friendshoring.
Relocate, and people are calling it friendshoring, reshoring, right? And in fact, some countries are onshoring again. So Malaysia and a few other countries in Southeast Asia, because of our neutral stance, will be able to benefit and leverage our position both politically and geographically to get some of the supply chain to Malaysia.
Malaysia's GDP saw strong growth of 8.7% on year in 2022, the biggest rise since 2000, making the country an attractive place to invest in. South Korea sees Malaysia as an important partner in renewable energy and works together on a clean hydrogen production project. South Korea's trade ministry had also urged Malaysia to support Korean companies that invest in Malaysia's energy and EV battery sectors, while aiming to cooperate on stabilizing the bilateral supply chain. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
For a look at the news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley joining us here in the studio. Good morning, Matthew.
Good morning, Tommy.
Let's start in the Philippines, where search and rescue efforts are still ongoing following a deadly ferry fire.
Well, that's right. According to the latest reports, at least 31 people have been killed and 7 are missing after an inter-island ferry traveling from the Zamboanga province to Jolo, Sulu province caught fire on Wednesday night local time. Now, the fire started with most passengers still asleep. Over 220 of the total 250 passengers were rescued, with dozens jumping into the sea in a bid to escape the flames. Now, passengers were helped by the Coast Guard and local residents of the nearby Baluk Island. The cause of the fire is still being determined, but eyewitnesses report hearing explosions both before and after the blaze started. Now, the Philippines has a record of maritime disasters due to aging vessels and overcrowding on ships. Now, turning over to the U.S. state of Kentucky, where at least 9 U.S. service members have died following the crash of 2 U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopters. Now, the crash occurred near Fort Campbell in the state's southwest during a routine training exercise that involved 4 helicopters on Wednesday evening local time. Now, reports say the two aircraft crashed into an open field and that there were no survivors. The helicopters were medical evacuation aircraft, part of the 101st Airborne Division. The cause of the crashes is still under investigation, and it's not known whether they collided with each other. The crash marks one of the deadliest training disasters for the U.S. military in recent times. Meanwhile, Major League Baseball's regular season kicked off on Thursday with new rules introduced which are meant to speed up games and introduce more action. And included in the changes is a first for the league, as games will now feature a pitch clock. Pitchers will now only be allowed 15 seconds to throw a pitch when bases are empty and 20 seconds if a base has a runner. And staying with bases, these have been enlarged from 38.1 centimeters to 45.7 centimeters. This is to accommodate the growing size of players over the years and to encourage more base steals, as well as to reduce injuries. And finally, researchers have found that plants can make noise. According to a study published in the science journal Cell on Thursday, plants make clicking and popping sounds that are not audible to the human ear. But using a special ultrasonic microphone, researchers have been able to capture what these noises sound like across a variety of plant types. Let's take a listen. Now, the finding shakes up previously held notions that the plant kingdom was mostly silent. Researchers also found that stressed plants make about 30 to 50 sounds per hour, while unstressed plants emit about 1 sound per hour.
Good morning. It's the last day of March, but it will feel more like the middle or end of May by the afternoon. And it will be even hotter this weekend, with an expected peak going above 25 degrees Celsius in the capital. Not to mention the cherry blossoms have already reached near full bloom. And it looks to be a very crowded weekend on the roads, with the blossom attracting crowds. But when you do go out, be sure to have a face mask that can filter dust if you are in the west of central regions and Gyeongsangdo provinces. And unfortunately, it does not look any better tomorrow either. Wash hands frequently and drink plenty of water. Now, the dry weather advisory is expanding to more parts of the country, so when you are going hiking, fire safety is a must. Afternoon highs will be 1 to 3 degrees higher than yesterday, with Daejeon and Daegu topping out at 25 degrees. Gwangju will see a high of 27 degrees under sunny skies nationwide. Then much hoped for rain is in the forecast for the first week of April. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That wraps up today's New Day at Arirang. We'll be back next week for Monday's edition at 9 a.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.
없지 않은가요? 처음 태어난 이별에서 사는 우리 손자요.
한번 이후엔
Busan, Korea is already reaching the entire world, like ocean waves that travel far and wide. It's Busan, the perfect World Expo city, transforming our world, navigating toward a better future.
심장이 나 어쩌면 좋아 가까워졌다 점점 멀어져가
type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's March 31st here in Seoul. I'm Shin Yeun, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Kim Xiang.
Good morning, yeah.
And Nelsa. Morning. And both are here to speak on behalf of those in their 20s and 30s. Now, we're going to start with the news feed that covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. And the first hashtag is cherry tomatoes. Recently, many people in South Korea felt nauseous or threw up after eating cherry tomatoes. And the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety said it would look into it. And on Thursday, officials found that this season's cherry tomatoes, specifically the type HS2106, were harvested in January when average temperatures were 3 degrees Celsius lower than usual. So this specific line of tomatoes produced more tomatin, a substance found among unripe tomatoes, making the taste bitter. And the government has identified which farms harvested this line of tomatoes and are now recalling them nationwide. And the second hashtag is cheetah. India has announced the birth of 4 cubs to one of the 8 cheetahs that were relocated from Namibia in southern Africa. India's environment minister tweeted a photo and video of the cubs on Wednesday, calling it a momentous event because cheetahs have basically been declared extinct in this South Asian country. And the last hashtag is Chun Woo-han, the grandson of the former Korean president Chun Doo-han. Now, we mentioned earlier this week that the 27-year-old grandson flew into Korea from the States to apologize to the victims of the 1980 military crackdown his grandfather led. Now, Chun was released Wednesday after police investigated him for around 38 hours for alleged illegal drug use. But instead of why he came to Korea and the fact that he had been detained, many paid more attention to his looks. Now, some left comments saying that he looked like an actor. Others said that we should be more forgiving because he's handsome. Now, why don't we talk more in depth about the third hashtag? As soon as Chun was released from police investigations, he went straight to Gwangju like he promised. And here's what he said as soon as he arrived.
항상 두려움에 이기적인 마음에 도피해 오던 곳인데 이렇게 많은 분들이 천사 같은 마음으로 환영해 주시고 정말 최선을 다해서 피해자분들께 상처받으신 모든 분들께 그분들의 억울한 마음을 최대한 풀어드리고 싶습니다.
And Chun is scheduled to meet with civic groups from the pro-democracy uprising on Friday. And I would like to ask our panelists in the studio what they think about this news item, starting with Nael. Now, what do you think about Chun's arrival in Korea and his efforts to apologize for his grandfather's wrongdoings?
You know, my dad's family is actually from Gwangju, and growing up learning about the uprisings and the fight for democracy, I understand how emotional why people are still emotional against the Chun family. And it's just really weird to me that people would be focusing on things like the looks at this point in time, you know, about his double eyelid surgery, his hair loss medication. Like, why do we care about that so much? You know, when this is actually a big deal, and we should actually be paying more attention to his intent and the lifestyle that he led. So it's baffling to me.
Yeah, I was quite startled to also look through all these tweets about Chun Woo-han, and a lot of people focused on his looks.
Yeah,
as
and
you
saying
mentioned.
we should forgive him because he's handsome.
I know. And that's why, Xiong, I would like to ask you, do you think Chun's actions actually mean something to the victims of the 1980 pro-democracy movement?
I mean, personally, I think it does have meaning to the victims of the May 18th Gwangju democratic uprising. It was an entirely unjust massacre of civilians by Chun Doo-han, who took over the country via military coup d'etat on the 17th of May 1980. Chun was actually sentenced to life in prison and fined 220.5 billion won, which amounts to around 180 million US dollars, by the Supreme Court in 1997 on charges of high treason, mutiny and bribery. Chun refused to pay his fine his entire life until he died in 2021, making a mockery of not only the May 18th survivors, but the entire country by claiming he only has $200 in his accounts while still living a lavish life on luxury golf courses and his multi-million-dollar house. His grandson Chun Woo-han is not a different case. He also lived a lavish life, going to a luxury private school in the US, also finishing his university degree in New York State whilst living in a high-rise building, also a luxury estate, 71 floors. And it doesn't quite make sense that the offspring of such a family of crime and illegally claimed wealth is gaining such attention for just drug use and receiving some positive sentiment from what might be a small percentage of the Korean public. The apology from the Chun family is also an extremely belated one and shouldn't be treated as a heroic gesture at all by any means. Granted, the belated apology does have meaning, but it should not let Chun Won off the hook for his public attention-seeking attitude, which shows the extremely unstable sides of him screaming and jumping around in his self-filmed videos, whilst under, extremely excessive use of illegal substances. And if he truly wants to repent as he claims, I think the best way to go about it is quietly, repaying the sum of fine that still needs to be paid with his father if it's going to make any amends. And apologizing in a more quiet and private manner rather than going on television, asking for a press conference, as soon as he arrives at the airport.
There's definitely a lot of controversy.
Doesn't make sense.
Exactly, on how he's handling this. But a lot of local media outlets are looking into the fact that he's the one and only person from this Chun household to be visiting the May 18th Memorial Foundation in Gwangju. So our attention is geared there. And let's change topic to today's discussion topic, that is. And you may have heard this number over the past few weeks, 0.78. To find out what this is, take a listen. 0.78. That's the fertility rate in South Korea. And it not only ranks bottom among OECD countries, it's actually the lowest in the world. To tackle this problem, the Yoon administration convened a presidential committee meeting on Tuesday to come up with constructive solutions. For the first time in 8 years, the president of South Korea directly presided over a meeting to come up with ways to improve the birth rate. He also criticized the government spending of some $215 billion over the past 15 years, only for the downward trend to continue. The committee selected 5 key areas to tackle to push up the birth rate. They are childcare and education, better workplace policies, housing support, child-rearing expenses, and medical costs. Some applauded the president's efforts to raise low birth rate issues as an urgent national agenda item. But many, especially the younger generation, said it shouldn't be the state that is responsible for their children. It should be them. That's why some are demanding better infrastructure and an environment where they can confidently and comfortably choose to raise kids. Today, NewsGen looks at 3 questions. 1. What do millennials, Gen Z, and Korea think about the low birth rate problem and the latest solutions provided by the government? 2. What type of changes or measures do they want to see? 3. How are other countries trying to boost birth rates? What are some welfare policies Korea could implement to encourage more people to have kids? As we just saw, the low birth rate poses a severe problem for Korea to the extent that the president himself presided over a meeting and specifically said this is a priority that requires a lot of time and attention. Now, Xiao, why don't you first explain to us the gravity of the situation and what type of consequences or societal drawbacks can low birth rate have?
Yeah, South Korea's low birth rate has garnered the attention of both domestic and international society. Korea now has the lowest birth rate in the world and expected to have severe consequences related to the expected demographic changes. Let's have a look at the trend of figures to see the gravity of the situation. Only a decade ago, South Korea had more than 485,000 new births and a respectable average of 1.3 children per woman of childbearing age. This figure dramatically reduces starting from 2016 at 406,000 new births and 1.17 fertility rate, hitting the 300,000 bar in 2019, as well as a fertility rate of below 1. Last year, we saw a record-breaking low birth rate at 249,000 new births and 0.78 child per female. Such low birth rates have obvious consequences such as economic decline due to reduced workforce, as well as an aging population that could have negative consequences in the near future.
And that's why officials have decided to pick and choose which areas need improvement to boost birth rates. And if you take a look at the screen, I've summarized the main points of their recently proposed solutions, and there are 5 key areas that will be tackled. The first is in childcare and education. Officials pledged to give more stipends to help pay for daycare or babysitting services for households with 2 or more kids. They also said they would give incentives for childcare centers accepting newborns. And the second area they'll work on is better working conditions for parents. They'll allow them with kids up to age 12 to reduce their working hours. And this used to only be an option for parents with kids up to 8 years old. Now, if you take a look at the second chart that I have for you, the next set of policies will provide better housing support. 430,000 units will be allocated for newlyweds by 2027. Housing subscriptions will be open for households with at least 2 kids. Now, keep in mind this used to be 3. And the government also said they would bump up the parental allowance from 700,000 won per month to 1 million won, and that's around $765. And lastly, they said they would cover all hospital fees for children younger than 24 months. So you guys just saw the set of proposals they had right there. But now, what did you think about them?
Yeah, well, I think they're great, and it's a great step towards the future. And I personally think that Korea's pregnancy and birthing situation is quite okay. And we have really good postpartum care centers, and it's great that they're focusing on daycare and babysitting services. Nowadays, we see Walter, he's another panelist, and he's always lacking in sleep. And yeah, and I would
2 hours of sleep a day.
Right, 2 hours. How are we supposed to be happy parents if we don't get anything, any mental or physical support? So anything that's supporting parents, new parents in that way, I support.
So you think this is in the light of the right direction?
Yeah, I think so.
But what about you, Xiang?
Yeah, I mean, I also think these are fantastic. In my opinion, education and housing are the two, the paramount importance of policies that would boost the birth rate. I mean, tangible childcare support, parents' working conditions, as you mentioned, and monetary allowances are great as well. Especially the coverage, I think, of all hospital fees up to 24 months, I think is a fantastic support system for new parents as well.
But why do you think we're still seeing low birth rates? I mean, Korea does have a lot of good birth and welfare policies related to it, but millennials and members of Gen Z don't think that it's the state's responsibility. They think it's their responsibility, right? So why don't you guys provide ideas to tackle like birth rates, and what would make you want to have kids here in Korea, starting with Xiang?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think the first and foremost importance would be to increase the general wage levels before anything. Government support should be provided. Personally, I think in infrastructure reform, rather than blindly handing out cash that cannot be guaranteed to be used for childcare by the parents in the first place. Of course, certain high qualification jobs are indeed high paying in international standards as well in South Korea, but Korea still remains well below the OECD average of wages. Korea also for 26 years in a row has ranked the first place in the gender wage gap among all OECD countries.
Wow.
Depressive financial situation and societal gap will continue to stagnate the citizens' willingness to bear children.
Definitely. And Nell, any ideas that you might have?
Yeah, I just want to add on to what Xiong was saying about education. I personally think it's one of the biggest problems I see in raising children here in Korea. And if you want your kids to succeed, it's a common understanding that you need to send them to an English kindergarten for them to actually speak English, be bilingual, or even trilingual to succeed. And it's unfortunate because sending these kids to private English kindergartens can cost parents thousands of dollars for parents each month. But the fact that this private education and exposure to multicultural and multilingual education already puts these kids ahead of their peers, those who cannot afford it, it's unfortunate and quite frankly unfair. Yeah, but I think in a bigger picture, not on a personal level, even many developed nations that have very good welfare policies, they don't necessarily have really high fertility rates. And I think if they have turned towards migration policies, and that's something that we also need to focus here in Korea to better the lives of marriage immigrants, migrant workers. Yeah, I think so. so.
I think these are really good points. And if I sum up what you guys were saying, so wage, education, and migration policies. And let's see how feasible these solutions are by including a social researcher in our discussions. As President Yoon Suk-yeol addressed himself, hearing from millennials and Gen Z on what they think is the best way to tackle societal issues like low birth rate is key. But to what extent are their creative ideas feasible? Let's find out from Baek Ji-sun, a social researcher at the University of St. Andrews, whose research interests include fertility. Now, Ji-sun, it's our second time having you on our show. Welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me today again.
All right, Ji-sun, so as you may have heard, Chiyoung and Niall have proposed a few of their ideas to tackle low birth rate. They also spoke on behalf of the younger generation. And as a researcher, how feasible do you think their proposals are?
I agree with all the points that you made, but I also appreciate the idea of an education system for retired individuals to become babysitters. But we need to ensure this policy does not reinforce existing gender roles by only relying on retired women. Instead, we should explore ways to activate the labor market to support childcare without reinforcing gender roles.
I see. I think that's a very important point you made right there. Then what do you think about the Yoon administration's latest proposal to tackle birth rates?
So yeah, I think the proposal is a step in the right direction, but it seems to be based on existing policies with changes focused on just numbers, like increasing this, increasing that. So to address this long-term issue, we need a revolution, not just incremental changes. I hope that this proposal can be improved to address the fundamental and structural problems that exist in civil aspects of Korean society.
And Chiyoung, you mentioned a very interesting point too. You mentioned the wage gap between genders, right? How do you think this has to do with the topic of discussion?
Yeah, I mean, of course, Ji-sun just mentioned a very good point, especially in elderly as providing childcare, and I think that grants them an opportunity for re-employment in later age as well. I think that's also fantastic. But the wage gap as well as gender roles in a traditionally sort of patriarchal society like Korea, I think one of the biggest problems here is also in SMEs, small to medium enterprises. These policies don't really matter. The maternity leave, paternity leave isn't guaranteed, and if women get pregnant and want to take a leave in a small to medium enterprise, they get frowned upon. I mean, I think that's also a societal change that we need to see before actually talking about the implementation of these new policies.
And that's why, Ji-sun, I want to ask you, do you think gender issues are one of the reasons behind South Korea's low birth rate compared to other parts of the world?
Yes, definitely. Actually, I was just thinking about these, gender issues, especially gender roles or discrimination against women. I believe this discrimination against women in the labor market amplifies gender roles. Because South Korea actually is at the very bottom of the glass ceiling index among OECD countries, which measures the gender equality in the workforce. But this discrimination against women is pushing men and fathers to have more pressure and reinforcing the gender roles. Because, at the end of the day, if mom quits the job to take care of the baby, it's the father who takes the responsibility to earn more money. So I think that was a very valid point.
All right. And lastly, what do you think, Ji-sun, are some birth rate policies implemented abroad that have been found to be very effective?
I would like to talk about a policy in the UK where people who are not legally married can also receive support for fertility treatment. In Korea, however, the government only provides support for this treatment to married couples, based on the culture that giving birth without marrying is considered taboo. I believe this belief is hindering the adoption of more progressive policies. So if Korean society shift away from this belief, there will be various ways to improve birth rate, I believe.
I think that connects well with what Niall mentioned earlier, too, that we shouldn't just be focusing on trying to raise birth rates, but looking into other options as well, like migration
policies, and, because there are a lot of people on the earth as a total, but, bringing them into our country will definitely raise the population.
All right, and thank you so much, Jisun. It was a pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you so
very
much.
Thank you, Jisun.
All right, and Jisun made a lot of fascinating points. Shiyoung, any that caught your attention?
I think this piece
He's having a little bit of a coughing thing.
Right, yes.
But apologies for that. But I think Jisun made some great points. I think what I actually took away from it was the last comment she made, and I think I mentioned it in the previous episode where we dealt with birth rate as well. The concept of civil partnership. In the UK, it's been a commonplace as well, and you can definitely get child support for an unmarried couple as well under a civil partnership.
Right.
I think that might be a great potential policy for South Korea as well, where you can, alleviate the burden of having to go through proper legal marriage and, having to have children after that. But, just lower the barrier and make everything a bit more, relaxed and let everyone allow a chance to have children without actually being properly married as well.
And what about you, Niall?
It was fascinating that she brought in the whole gender roles and how it's being more emphasized because, mothers stay home and then fathers have this pressure to earn more, so their wages go up. And I think that's an issue that should not be ignored when we're talking about this issue.
All right, and why don't we now hear from what our viewers have to say on today's discussion topic? Here's some of their suggestions to tackle low birth rates. If you take a look at the screen, we chose 3. Art said fewer people means less competition and more opportunities for us. We'll also be better valued as individuals and citizens. Hebaragi said the government needs to build safer public daycare centers where mothers can entrust their babies and make a law which allows couples with babies to take parental leave without feeling guilty. I think that's a very good point right there. Cool Yoshi said instead of giving money to parents, we should be focusing on preventing people from not wanting kids. Reduce work hours, affordable housing, better work policies, etc. Now, based on what our viewers have to say, I think this will go very well with our final thoughts. So if you decide to have kids in Korea, what do you guys want to see in terms of policy making or societal changes before you do?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Cool Yoshi's comment the most as well. And I think childbearing happens with or without government support. And it has been happening like that in conventional terms as well.
Right.
So, I personally also don't want to rely 100% on public provision for child support to raise my children, as I want to be able to provide for them myself.
Right.
And I think most couples think the same way.
Right.
And if the potential parents themselves cannot afford a financially comfortable life for themselves at this stage, it'll definitely hinder the likelihood of them wanting to bear children in the near future as well. So public policies are great, but it should be remembered that every penny is paid for by the citizens as well. So as I mentioned before, rather than blindly doing cash payments, if we can actually turn to the root of the problem and have a better economic situation for all citizens, young citizens as well, I think that will definitely boost
and
the birth
very
rate.
briefly, Niall, do you agree to what Shiyoung just said?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just aiming towards being more independent and financially or just whether in time, I'm personally doing that, pursuing the whole freelancer life to be able to spend more time with my family.
All right, and why don't we end today's discussion? Making a better environment for the next generation is the agenda we're trying to achieve. And we'll be here every day from 9:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you the topics that young people are talking about. Special thanks to Kim Shiyoung.
My pleasure, yeah.
And Niall Song.
No problem.
And thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you next week. We are News Generation.